What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Brainpower. This is episode 18, and today joining me is Vlad Avesalon, who is a kind of jack of all trades in crypto and has been involved in a ton of different projects. Most recently, Cosimo Capital, which is an investment firm in the crypto space that also was running a BitTensor subnet, or providing compute at least to a BitTensor subnet. Really interesting conversations there around DAI and his thoughts on DAI. Also is a core team member in Zuitzerland, which is a community of people building a network nation state, but then also doing physical meetups as well. And with that, they even established a small physical society for a little over a month this year in Switzerland with contributors and participants, including the likes of Vitalik Buterin. It was a very interesting conversation and some excellent insights from Vlad. As always, if you want to be a supporter of Brainpower, all that we ask is that you like and subscribe to us on anywhere that you're consuming this podcast or our written content, and maybe consider staking to the Builder subnet if you are a holder of more tokens. With that being said, and without further ado, here is Vlad Avesalon.
I'm trying to free your mind, but I can only show you the door. You're the one that has to walk through it.
You're listening to Brainpower.
All right, awesome. We're back, episode 18, featuring Vlad Avesalon, who is like a Swiss Army knife of crypto stuff. So Vlad, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Bo. Good to see you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to have you dive into your background just because I want the community, Brainpower crew, to get an understanding of who you are. You've been in crypto for quite a while and have been involved in a lot of things. I think everyone listening will come to find that Swiss Army knife of crypto is not an exaggeration. So Vlad, can you dive into who the heck are you?
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, that's kind of a perfect way of putting it. My background out of college was in healthcare. I was a developer in the healthcare space for a long time. And I just always had a fascination with tech. So naturally, I gravitated towards Bitcoin pretty early in 2013. And then obviously as these cyclical bull markets developed, you go deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole. So 2017 was my Ethereum pilling phase. 2020 was kind of DeFi and the yield farming phase of crypto. And I think this one has been largely defined by, decentralized AI, some of the stuff going on with DePIN and decentralized physical infrastructure. And in terms of just my career path, I basically fully exited my healthcare career in 2021 to do an NFT startup. I did that for 3 or 4 years. That was fun. I felt like we started that whole project kind of at the tail end of NFT mania. So that was a bit of a grind working through that and for the 2 years after that. And then I developed a fascination just for just venture in general, because I spent so much time in startup just trying to pitch to VCs and working with that side of the world. And so I went kind of flipped and started working in the fund space with a local firm here called Cosimo Capital, which is a liquid token fund with a big emphasis on decentralized AI, specifically with BitTensor. And I think around that time is how we connected, in Toronto during that decentralized AI conference. So.
Yeah, so funny story about that. When Vlad and I first met, it was in Toronto at an event that Morpheus was co-hosting. It was a DAI day, one of the early ones. And I think we were standing in line for coffee or something, and we started talking and realized basically that we were both in Toronto, but we live 10 minutes from each other.
Yeah.
In real life, we live right next to each other without knowing it. And it was just one of those things that I was like, there's no way that you happen to be this guy that I didn't know about who's involved in all of these things. And keep in mind, you guys, this was over a year ago. And so DAI was brand new. I mean, it was the first time people were really paying attention to it, with the exception of BitTensor. I will give BitTensor its shouts that it was earlier than everybody else. I think they went live in 2019 or 2020, but it's taken a much different form today than maybe it launched with. Let's talk about Cosimo a little bit, because that's right now kind of the daily role for you. Can you dive into as much as you're able to, obviously, with it being an investment fund, how Cosimo looks at DAI, and maybe, I know you touched on BitTensor, what are some of the things you guys are paying attention to or have been for a little while?
Yeah, so Cosimo has been running a subsidiary called Nakamoto, which we're currently not as active right now, but that was really the sort of like the operational side of our involvement in centralized AI. So we had a team of developers who were fine tuning models on BitTensor on different subnets, and we were also running a BitTensor validator. So we were basically earning emissions and operating actively in the ecosystem. So that's how the fund kind of specialized in the protocol, and then obviously had an investment in it on the liquid token side. That led us to look into other projects in the DAI space. Obviously, Morpheus. There's another project called Vana, which we dabbled in. They had this concept called data DAOs. So Vana's perspective was kind of attacking AI training from just a model of like user contributed data. So just kind of like finding a way to aggregate, pools of data that could be used to train models. Yeah. But right now I think Cosmo's mainly focused on the investor side and just really just like investing in like promising protocols and tokens and just staking. But the whole thesis, I think, behind the approach was to get involved early, understand the protocol, see how it develops, and then have like build a good investment thesis around it for the fund.
Totally makes sense. Let me
Yeah,
steel man for you
sure.
why you should be paying attention to Morpheus even more so than you guys are, and
Yeah,
why it's actually complementary to BitTensor, not a competitor to BitTensor. So this
sure.
is a question that people in the community bring up quite a bit because quite honestly, if you're interested in DAI, it's hard to not pay attention to BitTensor and acknowledge like that they've built a fairly large ecosystem, and we're kind of like I would say the first mover in this space, or at least certainly one of them.
Yeah,
So my steel man for why Morpheus is actually complementary is that if we look at BitTensor as each BitTensor subnet effectively being a business that's incentivized to do something
yeah,
within the DAI space, right? Like they could theoretically do anything. Now, to my understanding, a lot of them are focused around model training, and basically building projects that consume inference. So some of them are on the consumer side of inference and some of them are on the provider side of inference. For
yeah.
any of the ones that are on the provider side, which is anyone that's doing some type of model training and then ultimately like creating a fine-tuned model,
Hmm.
they could be compute providers to the Morpheus ecosystem. So they could say, okay, we've trained this incredible model that has a niche focus. Our incentive mechanism for doing so was done through the BitTensor ecosystem, but we want to take our subnet and we want to make it, one, more widely available to users, and two, more profitable for their subnet. They could say, hey, we're going to take this model that we trained in our BitTensor subnet. We're going to register it as a registered model on the compute network within the Morpheus ecosystem. And that
Hmm.
allows anybody on the builder side of the Morpheus ecosystem or the agentic side to actually run that model as inference within their own project. And
Sure.
they will get paid as a compute provider, as a Morpheus compute provider in more emissions. So it's basically taking the work that they did and they built in BitTensor and publishing it somewhere else to allow more people to use it. And to say, hey, you don't only have to use it by running inference on BitTensor. We can run it in other places. So that's like the first one where I see there's an obvious connection to me. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, it makes total sense if you can kind of play around for incentives in different ecosystems without adding too much work to your plate. It makes a lot of sense. Um,
Yeah, I think from a
yeah,
technical lift, like the real
yeah,
technical lift is happening on the side of the training, not necessarily on the side of the hosting.
yeah. So, I mean, just to like zoom out a little bit, Morpheus, BitTensor, some of these others we talked about, Vana. I think I mentioned EigenLayer to you at some point. To me, these are all coordination layer for like non-blockchain services, like compute services. And so like everybody, like to me, each of these is just doing like a different flavor of like something similar. So it's really just like, which one's providing like the best incentives and the best incentive mechanisms. So like, I think that's how I look at all these different projects. Like which one has like the best sort of like narrative and incentive mechanism to like attract talent.
Yeah, I would say I agree with that, like to some degree. I think, okay, so one of the things I talk to people about a lot is when I compare the DAI space to the DeFi space. So one thing that's very
Yeah.
different about the DAI, the DAI space is that the the DeFi space relies on you to basically have tribalism with regard to what chain you're operating on, right?
Yeah.
And now we do have cross-chain platforms for sure, but there's still this level of tribalism that's like, okay, who is the ultimate oracle of truth when it comes to this virtual machine or virtual ledger and recording what happened and when it happened, right? And so whether you're like, I'm an EVM person or I'm a Solana person or whatever it is, you get these battles because ultimately there has to be a settlement layer for this information, and who wins that settlement layer is like where your priorities kind of lie, right? Okay,
Yeah.
DAI does not have that same issue because, to the point you just made, like, these are services and protocols that live on top of blockchains and interact with blockchains, but they are, well, okay, this is where I have a gripe with BitTensor. BitTensor is natively a blockchain. Something like Morpheus is not. And there's other projects similar that aren't, which I think is actually an advantage of the protocol because, like I said, and I don't have a problem with BitTensor, I just don't think they're actually competing protocols.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the one thing I will say about BitTensor is I mean, I agree with you. It does not need to be its own blockchain. I think there were very esoteric reasons why originally they did decide to fork off of like Polkadot and like, because originally they were a parachain and then they sort of like forked off the parachain, but kept like, the infrastructure. But there's no reason. I mean, I don't even know what validators on BitTensors look like today. As far as I know, it's mostly just like the OpenTensor Foundation running the actual blockchain validators. They could just as easily spin up an L2 on Ethereum, or for that, just like the way Morpheus is doing, which I think is just like on Arbitrum, right? Like just run on L2.
So yeah, so today the More token lives on ETH mainnet, Arbitrum, and Base, and there's actually an integration being announced pretty soon with another major chain. So I would love to put it out there. I'm not at liberty to. I don't want to announce something on someone else's behalf because it was a huge technical lift for other people. But so but theoretically, like, we're chain agnostic. I mean, if somebody wanted to build an integration to any chain, they could, including BitTensor. You could actually theoretically. I guess I don't know exactly how their I know that like DTAO exists, right? So you have a subnet, which is like a derivative token then of BitTensor, the main chain. So I think theoretically you could have a DTAO that represents like a Morpheus subnet or something like that if someone wanted to do it. But it wouldn't be. I would imagine there's probably a way to have like wrapped More token on BitTensor's chain if you really wanted to. I guess I don't know exactly how that would happen, but it's not going to be necessary. The point that I'm trying to get to is these two things can interact with each other. I can say, okay, I'm a BitTensor subnet that trains XYZ agent, which I turn around and register on the Morpheus agent registry. And now I've opened myself to all of these new users and people who can interact with it outside of just the chain of BitTensor.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah. I mean, again, I think like if you just look at these as like kind of coordination layers and like the tokens themselves as just being like coordination mechanisms, like again, none of these projects need a blockchain, right? Like none of the services on BitTensor or on Morpheus like need it. Like they're not financial, like blockchain based financial services or NFT based or anything like that. So again, like the blockchain piece is just like the token distribution mechanism, and like the financialization with like regards to BitTensor, to your point about like DTAO, like there's alpha tokens now, right? Like each of the subnets gets their own token. So it's kind of like a business, like essentially IPOing. And so like, great. Yeah, we need the blockchain for that because now we need to track this other token. But again, this can be done on any L2 on Ethereum, even on, Solana. I think there's probably AI projects on Solana. Like Virtuals runs on Base.
Yeah.
So
do you find that when you like are in, I guess, just out in the market talking to people about DAI, that is that kind of how it's being spoken about? Because, for example, historically, from the interactions I've had, the AI crowd does not generally love the crypto crowd, and that's like actually an uphill battle from the crypto perspective. But usually when I talk to people about this, it's basically through the lens of the token More is a means to an end to do the various things that we want to build. It's not actually, which is kind of what you were saying, right? Like it's not reliant on the token. The project isn't the token. The project and product is the AI.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple ways to look at that. One A side I would say about just to kind of cap off the L1 blockchain discussion. I think historically the reason why some of these projects have decided to build an L1 blockchain, like I don't know BitTensor, but some other ones I've spoken to, I don't want to name too many because I don't want to shame people for starting their own layer one. But I would say historically, yeah, okay, I'm very tempted to, but generally speaking, I think there's been a misconception that in order, like, and it's not just a misconception, like the market has actually rewarded this, but like starting a new L1 project will give you a higher valuation initially. And I think like if we're being honest, a lot of VCs will be like, just do the L1, justify it as because we need decentralized, blah, blah, blah. But really it's because like the market will reward you for being another L1. Like
That's a good point. Yeah, call yourself an ETH killer and the next Bitcoin, and you'll have a higher early valuation.
Yeah, for
I mean,
sure.
you're not wrong. You're definitely not wrong. As much as I hate to say it, if crypto was a rational market, it would look very different than it does.
It's getting there. It's getting there, but it's taking a long time.
Yeah, and ultimately, like, look, I agree with you. Like, I'm joking about L1 shaming, but the reality is, like, I don't want to ever shame someone for trying to build like a legitimate piece of technology that, whether it's from a financial perspective or from just a tech perspective, like pushes society forward. I mean, ultimately, if it's freedom tech, like I'm going to support it. My problem comes in when people call things freedom tech that like aren't really freedom tech. And like which is, subjective, I guess, to some degree. But anyway, okay, I want to move on from this. I want to jump into Zuitzerland. So this is super interesting, and I guess I just want to give my perspective of like what I think this was, and then I want to hear from you as somebody who is involved in this. To me, this looked like a trial run of what a crypto utopia society would look like if you actually lived in one. Is that like a fair classification?
Yeah. So I guess first of all, a little background on Switzerland because I didn't really mention it, and just in the intro. The sort of the verbiage, the mission, the slogan for it was a network state sandbox. So, if your audience is familiar with the concept of a network state, this is something that like Balaji has written a book about, literally called like the network state. But the idea is that like in a like a future model of society, like a nation or a state, kind of like a collective of like people that are given sort of like citizenship type rights will be birthed like from internet movements. So I would say like probably one of the like OG, at least in the Web3 sense, the OG network state is really Ethereum. Like Ethereum itself is a collective of people who have their own money, which is Ethereum, and they're building all this like infrastructure. And right now it's mostly internet native infrastructure, but over time, as identity gets built into these and like real places start building on top of it around this identity, like you will bridge the virtual community into physical spaces. And so like Switzerland was kind of, it was a project attempting to do that, which is like, what if we get all these like Web3 privacy, Ethereum aligned people in one place? Like what would need to be built out for this to be like a sustainable, like permanent settlement? And would it be more semi-permanent in the sense that like, because it's now like your identity is tied to this like internet thing, you don't necessarily have to settle in one place. Like they could be like different nodes around the world where like Switzerland is one node of this like, sort of like archipelago of different like network cities, states that you can go bounce to because you have this like identity to tie yourself to each of these places. Yeah.
And how can you talk about like in practice, what did that look like this year?
Yeah, so we ran a 1 month long village in a town called Laux, which is like about an hour and a half outside of Zurich. It was at this like beautiful ski resort, which we basically had all to ourselves for the month. And we had about 100 to 150 like settlers, if you will, or residents who were there for the entire month. And then I think over the course of the month, we had, over 200 to 250 people who came in and out. We also had like a summit that was like a 3-day thing. So like the majority of people did stay there for the whole month. And it was amazing. We had a really nice blend of like educational, builder activity and also social activities. So we had like this like really nice tavern that was part of the resort that was all to ourselves with this like full service like chef's kitchen. And 3 4 times a week we would take that place over and have these like huge 30 40 50 people dinners. Like we would cook for each other and have these dinners, and then we would do activities. I hosted like a couple of improv nights. We had a teammate who did like karaoke nights, and on the weekends we did like these big hikes. I mean, we were in the mountains, we were in the Swiss Alps. So we did these like incredible like 10-mile hikes, and it really felt like a community of people. I think like there's different ways to frame what we did. You could call it like a summer camp, like a techie sort of like boot camp, summer camp. But the goal was to like experiment also with like governance, and like we had like town halls every week. And the idea was to sort of like see like, okay, what would this look like if this was like a democratic structure with like elected leaders and like a constitution? And at what point does it need to get to that? Because like at 100 people, it sounds kind of ridiculous to be doing all this stuff. But like at 1,000 people, is that enough to like start introducing some of these things and making them part of the permanent governance structure? Yeah.
Okay, so I'm glad you framed it that way towards the end, because in practice, I wasn't there obviously, so I'm hearing about this secondhand. Although you guys did invite myself and David and a couple other Morpheus contributors, and we did not have representation there. So that is an L on us. I will take the L, and we will get someone, or me or someone else out there, the next time that you guys do this. But what I wanted to talk about though is, on the one hand, like, you can like kind of make light of it and be like, okay, it's kind of like crypto geek summer camp in a way. But what you're the underlying, okay, if you look at it as an onion and then you peel back that next layer though of what's actually happening there underneath it, exactly like you said, you're experimenting with this idea of what could a nation state or what could an organization of people actually look like in practice if they're not bound by geography and they're instead bound by some other type of network. And just so people listening know too, like this was like pretty serious. Like, I don't know if I can say this, tell me if I got to cut this or not, but like Vitalik was there. I don't have to cut it. There's videos of it. Vitalik Buterin was there participating in this.
Yeah, I mean, Vitalik was very intimately involved. Like he funded the majority of this thing. Like that's public information. You can see the transaction on chain where he funds us. And by the way, this was like Vitalik was the one who ran the original version of this. It was called Zuitzerland. It was in Montenegro like 2 years ago. And Zuitzerland was kind of the spiritual successor to it. Like there's been many pop-up villages. There's an organization called Edge City that's been doing them around the world now for almost 2 years. They've kind of perfected like their model of it. But Zuitzerland was kind of the spiritual successor to Zuitzerland in the sense that like what was important to us was to have a location where everybody co-lived together and did like the majority of things together. So it was really like this idea of like, this is like a village of people. And by the way, like we are not done. Like I am still an active participant in the Zuitzerland. I'm still part of the team. And what we're working on now is to figure out what a more permanent version of Zuitzerland looks like. Mm-hmm. And to kind of circle back to a discussion that we had at the tail end of the DAI stuff, like coordinating and having a token is potentially part of that discussion, right? We were talking about what is the More token, what does the BitTensor token actually mean? Well, in terms of coordination token, you can think of it just like as money. It's like literally the money of this ecosystem, and the incentives are basically like grants. They're like sort of like subsidies to like each of these things to get started and develop like the entire ecosystem. And when you think about like starting a network state, you think about, okay, what is going to be the money of our network state? Is it going to be Ethereum? And how are we going to fund all the things to build out our like little community here? And that could look like, a community token, or it could be like, okay, we got to use Ethereum, but then like you have to directly incentivize people using Ethereum, which means like somebody's got to, give us Ethereum essentially, right? And we have to like kind of spread it out amongst like the different projects of the community.
Well, yeah, you would need, like, if you're a proper nation state or any organization, like you need some type of budget, basically. Like in the form of something like Morpheus, you have protocol emissions from the protocol itself. But and like we're keenly designed to not have central control, but like there has to be, for something like you're talking about, there has to be some level of central control of capital, but it doesn't necessarily mean like one individual. It could be like you could do it as a DAO structure. Like there's a bunch of different ways to do it. And I like your framing of like what does the token actually represent, because in Morpheus the token represents access to intelligence. If I'm holding more tokens, at any point in time, I can stake them to access some form of intelligence, whether that be using an agent somebody else designed, whether that be giving inference to my agent, or just like directly accessing inference if I need to. And so I would imagine for Zuitzerland, it would essentially represent citizenship and then the benefits of having citizenship. Like what does that actually mean? So I think we should actually pull the thread a little bit more on this idea of a network nation state, because I would imagine like some of the people listening to this have probably read Balaji's book. A lot of them probably haven't. But so one of the key tenets like of what makes a network nation state a nation state is basically like, how do you make a group of people that has all of the like resources and benefits of like a country, what we know as a modern country, but with land being the last priority, right? So like historically land was the first priority. It was you go conquer XYZ amount of land, you settle it and create a nation. This is kind of the inverse of that. Do you have any additions onto this, Vlad, or like thoughts on what it means?
Yeah, well, I think that's like a pretty central debate in the like this sort of crypto village network state little community is how important is the land, because we've seen different projects take different approaches. So for example, like Edge City now has a piece of land that they purchased north of San Francisco in this town called Hillsburg. I don't know, to be fair, I don't know how intimately like the actual Edge City Foundation or whatever their corporate structure is tied to the actual like ownership of the land, but like, and I think Balaji, he's doing the network school out in Malaysia.
I
And
think
I
it's
think he
Malaysia.
bought, yeah, and he bought a piece of property to do that whole thing. So there is like a real estate play here, and that's like, that's something that we have to grapple with too. With like Switzerland is like, how important is the land ownership aspect? And I would argue it's like pretty important, because like that's kind of like you don't want to be rugged by your landlord. And also you want to settle in a place where your like land ownership rights are pretty strong. Like, private property rights are pretty strong in the US, not as strong in some of other parts of the world. Like if the government turns authoritarian, they're like, your network state's cool, get out of here.
Yeah.
Like you don't have any authority here.
But I think that's why the argument for the land being the least important thing is so powerful. Because if you're aptly like if you're considerably organized and funded and have shared principles in mind, you could operate within like this network of people no matter where in the world you are.
That's true.
So like, and the question is, and this is what the book touches a lot too, is like at what level do modern organized governments acknowledge these network states as like sovereign? And what does that mean?
Right. Well, I mean, I think we also have to like step back and think like, okay, if I'm a citizen of one of these network states, what does that actually give me? Because like as a citizen of the US, I have a bunch of benefits that come to me, like social security benefits, access to healthcare to some degree. We can debate on whether there should be more or less of that. But I mean,
Vlad is Canadian, by the way, just so you guys know.
I guess I got citizenship, so if things get bad here, no. I do love me some U.S. citizenship, so I don't.
Wait, you're a dual citizen, right? Technically,
I am. But I mean, but that is a debate, and if you like to your point, if you're not tied to like a place, like a physical place, how much benefit are you expecting? Like if there's like a Zuzulu sort of network state that's like Switzerland and a bunch of other places around the world, or if there's a Switzerland network state, like how much of some of those like sort of basic rights are you getting? When you talk about like, staking a token to become a citizen or something like that. Okay, now I have to like pay for access, which is fundamentally different than the way like a nation state works. Like I don't have to,
Well,
like,
you do through taxes though, right?
You do
So
through
like
taxes. And when I think about even just like investor visas, maybe that's a whole other philosophical debate. You can buy your way into a place.
Sure. Yeah, no, 100%. But I look at it like, okay, let's say this is fictitious, but like let's just, or as far as I know, let's say that Switzerland's main goal was like, okay, we want to create a network nation state that provides healthcare to people, right? Like let's say that was the main goal. And so if the idea is you pay some type of token tax as like to maintain your citizenship within Switzerland, but in return for that, Switzerland has a team of doctors and like lawyers who will negotiate on your behalf with pharmaceutical and insurance companies to ensure that you have healthcare everywhere you go in the world. And that's the benefit that you're receiving because it's being funded by the common good, like of Switzerland.
Yeah.
That is like a legit value proposition, I think, to somebody.
That I totally agree. I mean, I think then if that is the focus of this thing, you also have to ask yourself, like, okay, are we just putting a fancy term on essentially like a next generation, like insurance company? Like, is this just really like a global insurance, like cooperative?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, sure. Like the version I described, I think that's a fair way to categorize it.
Yeah.
I can't say categorization. Wow. But the difference being insurance companies as they exist today are completely central and not transparent.
Yeah.
So this is basically what I described is a decentralized insurance company that has transparent rules, regulations, and coverages. And this is like, I have this conversation with people all the time. I do not want anarchy. I want rules and law of order that makes sense and is fair and like actually is followed by everybody. To your point with the travel, yeah, you have to travel based on the visa system unless if you have enough money to not, right? But like if we lived in a world where that just wasn't the case, like it's better for not better for everybody, but it's a more fair, just world.
I mean, look, I'm totally with you. I think the reality of the world we live in today is that there are, there's borders, there's border control, there's, physical, like we're seeing what's happening with immigration today, like in general. And to me, like, I frame this like the network state stuff a lot as like, it'll teach us a lot in terms of not only like deploying tech to make, like network or state function more efficient, like not only philosophically, but technically. And then we can go and we can apply these lessons to current structures, like current like state systems, nation systems. And I think that's like the cool part of the network state thesis. I think in terms of like the actual projects, like I'm hoping there's a few, and I hope Switzerland is one of them that will actually achieve some of these ambitious goals over the next like decade, 2, 3. I mean, these are like generational projects as far as I'm concerned. Like the idea of going from like a little commune of like 100 people to like, like a citizenship, like a state with like sort of like, like country level rights. That's multi-decade at least.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But I think most of these projects will probably stop well short of that, right? Like they'll basically, sometimes, like, if you want to talk about Vitalik, one of the first, sort of like symposiums we did about like Switzerland, and another one called Zuitzerland was in Singapore during Token 2049 last year. And we touched on this subject, and I sort of picked Vitalik and said like, well, isn't this just sort of like fancy WeWork? Aren't we just kind of like doing WeWork on the blockchain to some degree? You're asking for like access to like this co-living and co-working space. Like at one point, like WeWork was actually designing like a We Live, like a thing where like people, like some of these WeWork members would live together. And at that point, it was derided by people as not only like kind of crazy, but also like culty a little bit, right? So there's like an element of like, okay, like what are we actually doing here? Is this all just kind of like a little crypto bubble cult?
I see what you're saying. I mean, sure, but also like, I feel like I could fit so many things into that box of like, is nationalism not culty? Is religion not culty? Is like to some degree, I could fit all these different things in that box. And like, I don't want to, again, like in practice, as they exist today, I agree. Now I'm steel manning Switzerland. In practice today, I agree that some of these things are like in practice, less serious in terms of like what you're literally physically doing. But the implications of like what is actually being experimented with and what the long-term implications could be is like so interesting and really, I mean, you are like the modern day settlers trying. We've consumed basically what can not. Well, actually, we haven't, but in real practical terms, we've consumed the land that can be easily cultivated and turned into a new country. I mean, that's not totally true, but let's just say that it's true. So you are the modern day version of what it means to go figure out how to reorganize humans. And like, that is super cool. Now, before we get out of here, I want to ask, do you see a world where AI and more specifically DAI can fit into this?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up. I do. Now, I want to touch on something that Vitalik and I have talked about multiple times with regards to DAI, because I think Vitalik's perspective is like he at least in its current state, like the narrative around decentralized AI doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, what actually makes decentralized AI decentralized? Because we're still hosting things on, cloud networks. Things can still be censored if they need be. Like, we're just sort of like, yeah, there's more nodes, and we are like, I guess like we are like fragmenting things a little more, and we're providing optionality, right? Like, if decentralizing AI means like providing optionality in terms of like the models that are available to you, or like the storage providers for your data, sure, that's decentralized. But I think the one thing that Vitalik's talked about is like, if we were to truly do like private sovereign like AI with regards to like you own your data, and you are the only one who can see your data, and you're the only ones who can like see your inferences, right? And keep a history of your inferences and the responses. That would involve things like zero knowledge tech and trusted execution environments. And when you kind of put all that together, one of the things he says is like, well, is this actually more efficient than just running everything locally on your device? So like, maybe the real definition of decentralized AI here is just doing everything on this, right? Like, everybody just runs everything locally, and all your data is on your device, and all your history is on your device, and it's just you having a conversation with your phone.
Sure. What's funny is like, that's an ironic, from my perspective, that's a somewhat ironic stance from like the godfather of Ethereum, because
Yeah.
because that's Solana's stance. Solana's stance is, well, if hardware gets good enough, you can run a Solana validator locally on your phone. And so now Solana validators live on every single device, and we're the most sufficiently decentralized network. It's like the opposite of Ethereum's current stance when it comes to decentralization. And I know, by the way, I know you're not like literally putting words into Vitalik's mouth and that's, but I understand what you're saying. And my argument there would be like, sure, if we're extremely optimistic about the amount of like compute you can have in your local device, then yeah, maybe we get to a world where that's the case. Now, then you run into situations where it's like, okay, well, who builds the hardware, and like who has access to that, which is a whole issue in itself. I think in the short term, it's really unlikely that you'll have the processing power, the storage capacity, like all of these things that you would need to sufficiently run like a personal super agent on your local device. And so the ability to have a device that calls out to a network of hardware resources that can do that for you is like the next obvious answer. So it's more of a practicality question than it is like, do I think he's wrong? No, not necessarily. I don't think it's practical.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't think it's an either or thing. I think both will co-live and have a place.
I agree with that.
As cloud versus local has always done, right? Like, this is not just like a AI thing. Like, I've had this debate, I had a talk about digital money, the idea of like having like digital cash that can be like device to device without having a blockchain, like a central ledger involved. Like, if you can develop that, that would be like literally like a replacement for physical money, because that's the way real cash works, right? You have a paper thing that you just give to people, and there's no sort of like bank that tracks that.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think these are probably the next evolutions of everything that we're working on. But it'll happen like in lockstep with the things that are being developed. And then it'll probably just make the systems better, because it's like, okay, if I can run the base version of my super agent locally on my device, that just means I could have an even better one if I'm running it locally on my device and also via a decentralized cloud. The last thing, oh, your cat's in the background. So cute. The last thing I'll touch on this is, this is a point that I hear the Akash community make, is that there is literally not enough resources for centralized entities to run these super networks on their own. The only way to accomplish the amount of resources you would need to run these systems is via decentralized cloud, because it would just
Yeah.
take, or like one singular entity or government takes over the whole world and says, well, these are all our resources now, so we run whatever we want. And that's
Yeah.
a whole, different outcome, bleak outcome.
Well, I guess like I hope we can take a minute here to get your perspective on this, because like I've always had this thought about not only DAI stuff, but like DePIN, like decentralized physical infrastructure in general, which is that these systems that are using like sort of like consumer hardware and like taking existing resources to sort of like, do you feel like these are just destined to always fill in the gaps? Like, will they ever actually be competitive with like centralized like big server farms, or will they just like help fill in like the edges of like coverage?
No, I think they will be the institutional standard, but it's not going to be you running a 4090 graphics card in your house. So it will still be institutional grade structures. And the reason I say this is, okay, think about this from the perspective of the data center. If I am running this massive data center, and I'm looking at it just as a business, do I care like who's consuming it? Like if I'm like, hey, I have all this hardware and I'm willing to, host XYZ AI model, do I care who my customer is on the other side, as long as I'm profiting off of the fact that I'm producing the bare metal? Like those mining type businesses, if you remove the principles and just look at it as a business, like they're pretty simple. It's hey, what I'm spending on hardware and electricity and insurance, is that being offset by what I'm earning from either token emissions or people renting my hardware? And so from that perspective, to support these large systems, you're going to have to be like an institutional grade provider, and they will do it if there's money to be made. And so the other part that I'll make, which is more of a core principle belief that I have, is it's going to be necessary for defense of these systems. So something that I bring up a lot is, I think that DePIN networks are going to be one of the most valuable like military defense structures for all global militaries that will ever exist. Because if I'm like the Department of Defense, or I'm an intelligence agency and I'm using AI agents for intelligence, which they're of course going to do I want my intelligence being in the hands of a centralized business or entity that I may or may not control, who has access to that information, especially if I'm outside of a superpower? So in the US, it's easy to say, well, the US government is in the pockets of, Sam Altman and Grok and X, and like they can do whatever they want because they'll host it there locally, and like, hey, don't mess with my data. Okay, I won't, like that's easy to say from the perspective of the US, but put yourself in the shoes of a much smaller country. If you're Ukraine, for example, and you're stuck in the middle of, and that's not really the best example, maybe Taiwan. Taiwan's a good example. If I'm Taiwan and I am potentially in a future where I'm being fought over by the United States and China. So the United States and China are in some type of conflict over me, basically. Who do I trust to run my defense AI systems? Do I trust the US side, or do I trust the China side? Well, how about I trust neither side, because I'm having all of that intelligence being hosted on a DePIN network that's decentralized, encrypted end to end. And so now it doesn't matter where in the world it's being hosted. I have verified access to it regardless. And even on the central side, sorry, one more point on this.
Sure.
Even if I'm the United States, if I'm running these these extremely like super intelligent agents, and I'm only hosting them on AWS servers or OpenAI servers or the Grok, I forgot what they're calling it, the like crazy data center that they're building in Texas. I can't remember the name, but I think the meta one's called Prometheus. But if I'm only hosting my agents on those sites, it's very easy for a superpower on the other side of the world to physically attack those sites to try to bring down my access to that intelligence. But if I'm using DePIN, my hardware resources might be host in my enemy's country without either of us knowing it.
Yeah. It's like the same way we talk about Ethereum being censorship resistant money, we're talking about censorship resistant infrastructure, right? Like just resources being censored. Yeah. That's a pretty deep rabbit hole. We can talk about also just like, okay, what does that mean in terms of like just decentralizing network access, right? Because if you need to access things that are remote, you're going to need internet access. that's like decentralized as well too, right?
Yeah,
So
well,
like,
someone will
and
build
then, like,
decentralized
satellites.
Starlink.
Let's see. Yeah, that would be the
Oh,
next step.
open source Starlink. Vlad, that could be you. Is that your next project? Can you make open source
Maybe. I
Starlink?
think somebody's trying to build that. There's all kinds of crazy crypto projects.
Well,
I mean,
look at like Helium and the mesh networks and things like
mhm,
that. It doesn't
yeah,
necessarily have to be global. I mean, you have Jack, old Twitter founder, Jack Dorsey, who made that BitChat app where you can transact Bitcoin over Bluetooth.
that's cool
Yeah, have
because
you
that
seen
goes back
that?
to my digital cash. That I mean, I've got BitChat on my phone. I don't know you can actually transact Bitcoin over BitChat. That's pretty
Yeah.
cool.
So my understanding is like the way that he designed it is you can be via mesh network transacting Bitcoin without having access to like Wi-Fi and the internet. And so
That's amazing. That's
the
basically digital
idea
cash.
is like yeah, and the idea is like if everyone is running these little tiny nodes on their hardware resources and now you have a mesh network, like there could be a world where you and I are on opposite ends of the globe, not 10 minutes down the road, and I'm able to send you Bitcoin without using the internet as we know it today. So
Mhm.
I think these things are going to exist. I mean, I'm hard bullish on these things.
I hope so too. I mean, I think we're kind of in an anti-globalism movement right now, but really like crypto, Web3, decentralized, that we're moving towards kind of a one world sort of thing where like nation states don't have control over like the infrastructure the way they used to. And that is like a political thing as well. Like we have to push towards a vision of the future that like allows for that.
Yeah,
So it's
totally agree.
exciting.
Can
Yeah.
all right. So as a last wrap up, Vlad, can you tell me what would if we look like 5 years down the line, maybe 5, 10 years down the line, like in the long term view, what does a successful like version of everything we were talking about look like? So whether that be like the network nation state, just like the things that you're involved in, like what does a successful outcome look like to you?
For 5 to 10 years, are you also baking in like decentralized AI into this stuff, or just let's focus on the network state stuff?
Let's focus on the network state. I mean, I personally hope that there's DAI plugged into that, but just in general, from the stuff that you're directly working on right now.
Yeah. I look, for me, I would like to see the tools that we've built in crypto and Web3 being foundational to the way, well, number one, a crypto village works. So, for me, what would be important, because I was a tech guy at Switzerland, right? Like I built the app for the village, and I'm like involved in thinking about what the tokenomics and what the potential like app ecosystem might look like for Switzerland down the line. And for me, it's sort of like obvious. And the analogy I make is to a project that I know is controversial, but I'm particularly bullish on these days, which is WorldCoin, like Sam Altman's thing. And the reason why I'm bullish on WorldCoin is because they've started with identity as being foundational, and they've decided that biometrics is the most like the easiest way to do personhood, like the iris. And the CEO Alex Blania, he was on Bankless lately, and he made like a very strong argument for why that's like the best solution. Um, but what you've done now is you've kind of started from a perspective of like giving somebody sort of like an online native like identity system, like a passport essentially. And then what they've done is they've built this app that starts with that, and then you have this like ecosystem of mini apps that work off of that identity and allow you to do like unique personhood things. Like there's a voting app, there's obviously like a DeFi app, there's like a Morpho mini app that's like just kind of your typical borrow lend. There's your typical DeFi suite of like swap protocols and all that. But essentially, like you can build on all the tools required to run like a state into this like ecosystem of apps, right? Like developers could build ways to distribute like funding for like research for like science or for like public goods. Like you could like world like the world token itself, the emissions are like very community centric. So like if somebody was like to build some sort of like health insurance thing, like they could do that, right? It could be a mini app and it would be tied to your world ID. So to me, like when I think about 5 to 10 years, like let's get the technical part right, where like we can run efficient governance and like benefits programs using your phone. Like the fact that we still have to go to like polls to me to like vote is it sucks. Like we don't trust electronic voting enough to say like we can like get everybody to just vote from their home. And like, you think about WorldCoin, if I can prove that I'm the one operating my phone and uniquely voting on a thing, then I can just vote from home. And that would drive up voter participation, right? And it would make voting so much more efficient, to the point where like you'd be like, well, we can decentralize a lot more decision making now. We can make more things a directly democratic process, because like anybody can spin up a proposal, an amendment, and be like, yo, we got till Sunday to vote on this. Like, do it from your phone, And maybe that's incentivized too, where you say like, okay, you get like some subsidy for actually participating.
That's awesome. I would also love to see that, a world where things like that exist.
Right.
I mean, I don't have any problems directly with WorldCoin. I hope the version of this that exists is sufficiently decentralized. I guess that would be my only comment on that.
Of course.
But I think that outcome is like super good and would be a net positive for humanity, and certainly like our local governments, like without a doubt.
100%. And they would adopt this stuff. They're not going to be first. They're not going to innovate on this stuff, but they would be in line to adopt this stuff, and I would love to see that.
Likewise. Awesome. Well, thanks for jumping on, Vlad. I really appreciate it. It's always a pleasure getting the opportunity to talk with you.
You as well, Bo.
Thank you.
I'm trying to free your mind, but I can only show you the door. You're the one that has to walk through it.
You're listening to Brain Power.